Thank you, Shmuley, for inviting me. This isn't my wheelhouse. Normally I talk about things I know something about. I don't know almost anything about this. But to be frank, I was so traumatized by October 7th a year ago. It made such an impact that I wanted a chance to put my own thoughts in order about what we have undergone, what we've been feeling about this. And I thank you for the opportunity to sort of try to put some parentheses around this to give it some meaning for me, at least, and maybe for you. It's what made it so traumatic was the sheer savagery of the thing, the distilled hatred right in your face, the fact that we still have hostages who are taken, who will not let the wound heal, where we're bleeding constantly from this trauma, which will not recede. And all of this makes it extremely hard to deal with, makes it difficult. And I say this as someone who is a deeply secular Jew. You know, I grew up in Beverly Hills, California, and in my high school it was 95% Jewish. Never met really non-Jews. I went to Harvard in 1965 as a freshman, and I looked around and I saw these people with wreaths on their door at Christmas, and I thought, anthropologically, how interesting is this? Who are these strange people that do this thing? And I don't think I ever, myself, can remember being conscious of being the subject of anti-Semitism, ever. And then you have this savagery full in your face, which distills the upwelling of anti-Semitism that we've seen in the last couple of years with the divisions in our country, Charlottesville, or they just stopped someone on the border coming over from Canada who wanted to kill Jews today in Brooklyn. And so it comes full in your face, and it's the kind of thing that leaves you in despair. And it brought to mind, and this is actually not planned with Pericles, but it brought to my mind one of my favorite poets, who's Yehuda Amichai from Israel, it turns out. And he has a poem, it's a wonderful, wonderful poem called Open, Shut, Open. And it's a very long poem, but I'm going to read you a portion of stanza 23, which is the last stanza. And it expresses, I think, the kind of despair that I felt a year ago. Still really, I'd say, feeling a lot of that. He says this, he says, after Auschwitz, no theology. From the chimneys of the Vatican, white smoke rises, a sign that the cardinals have chosen themselves a pope. From the crematoria of Auschwitz, black smoke rises, a sign that the conclave of gods has not yet chosen the chosen people. After Auschwitz, no theology. The numbers on the forearms of the inmates of extermination are the telephone numbers of God, numbers that do not answer and are now disconnected one by one. You think about that, you know, it's one thing to read a passage like that and, like Shmuley, believe in a God who can answer numbers, who can, you know, tear down the walls of a city if you march around it 13 times, or stop the sun in its tracks if you need to win a battle. But I personally, I'm a secular Jew. I don't believe in a God like that. So if God's not going to answer those numbers, who is going to answer those numbers? Who's going to respond to the calls of the dead and the martyrs of October 7th or of Auschwitz? Who? And I think the answer is really only one answer to that, and that's us. We have to be the people who answer those numbers when they call out, and they call out in pain, and they call out to reach out to us. We are the people who have to answer those numbers, but how do we do that? How do we do that when we're here in New Haven and we're not in Israel, we're not in the IDF, we're not even in the region? What response do we have, can we have, that can answer those calls that are made to us by these people, by the people of October 7th, by the people of Auschwitz, by the people of our past? And I think the way in which we do that is signified by the way Shmuley invited you here. He invited you for a commemoration. And so that raises the question, what is a commemoration? You know, if we're commemorating something, what are we doing? So I looked it up, of course, in the OED, and they tell me that to commemorate something is to celebrate it in speech or writing. I don't feel much like celebrating. I'm sorry, that's not why I'm here. That's not the thoughts I want to put together, a celebration. So I want to give the idea of commemoration a different meaning. And I'm going to draw that meaning from what is to me the greatest commemoration in the English language, certainly in the United States. And that is the commemoration that Abraham Lincoln gave in Gettysburg. So you had the Battle of Gettysburg, you had like 55,000 casualties, unimaginable slaughter in the little town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Never been anything like it on the North American continent, never has been anything like it on the North American continent. And he is invited to the cemetery to commemorate the dead. And how does he go about, what does he mean? How does he go about doing this magical trick, commemorating the dead? And he does it, he says, this is a passage from, I'm sure you've got it all by memory, but this is just think about it in terms of October 7th. He says, it is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. So that he's commemorating soldiers who were fighting for a cause. But the key point here is what he's saying is you commemorate by giving meaning to the death and living that meaning. We have to, what meaning do we take from this? How do we give this savage act of barbarity a meaning that can dedicate our lives so that they will not have died in vain? That to me is the meaning of commemorization. And it's a tough thing to think about how to do that because they weren't soldiers, they were just living their lives. So what meaning can we give it? My mind goes to the, in a few days in Yom Kippur, in the Musaf service, we're going to be reading the martyrology, right? And we're going to be reading about the Roman slaughter of the 10 rabbis, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shimon, etc. They pierced them with 300 lances, they burnt them, they flayed them, they decapitated them. And what sort of meaning do we give to those martyrs on Yom Kippur? We say again and again, these I recall and my soul melts with sorrow, for the bitter course of our history, tears pour from my eyes. So what's the meaning we give on Yom Kippur? The meaning is we survived. We're here to remember. The Romans are gone. Their memory. We remember our dead. We survived. They didn't exterminate us. And why do we give that meaning to it? Because the Romans had a way, which came from the Punic Wars, right? When they fought Carthage, the big saying was, Carthage must be destroyed. Delenda est, they must destroy Carthage. And when we rebelled, the Jews must be destroyed. Must be destroyed. And they could destroy a city. They couldn't destroy a people. They couldn't destroy an idea. They couldn't destroy a set of beliefs. Those things you can't destroy. And so it's a triumph to be alive, to be non-destroyed, to remember them. They are now just the figments of our memory, and we survived. Is that what we want to say to the dead of October 7th, that we survived? Is that enough? And I think not. Do we want to say to the dead of October 7th that we will remember you the way that the Romans remembered, the way the Romans acted, that Gaza must be destroyed, like a Roman, like Carthage must be destroyed, Palestine must be destroyed, West Bank? Do we want to turn into the Romans whom we remember badly on Yom Kippur? I don't think so. I don't think that's our way. I don't think that's the meaning that we want to give to October 7th, that we are the people who exterminate others. So what meaning can we give them? And I want to give a few ideas, and I want to draw them from a Lithuanian poet who wrote in Polish, won the Nobel Prize in Literature. His name is Czesław Milosz. And he came of age in Eastern Europe in the dark days of World War II. And he writes about the Holocaust He writes about the destruction of Eastern Europe, Lithuania, Poland, and so on. And he captures the world in which we are at war with each other, and we've been pulverized and alienated. He has a wonderful poem called Child of Europe. These are some lines from that poem. He says, "We, from the fiery furnaces, from behind barbed wires, on which the winds of endless autumn howled, we who remember battles where the wounded air roared in paroxysms of pain, we, saved by our cunning and knowledge, having the choice of our own death or that of a friend, we choose his, coldly thinking, let it be done quickly. We sealed gas chamber doors. We stole bread, knowing that the next day would be harder to bear than the day before." And the point of these lines from Milosz is that Europeans learned all the wrong lessons, Eastern Europeans, from the horrors of the Holocaust and from the destruction of the Nazis. So these are his lines of lessons that people learned in Lithuania and Poland. "Love no country, countries soon disappear. Love no city, cities are soon rubble. Do not love people, people soon perish, or they are wronged and they call for your help." These are the wrong lessons. And Milosz eventually emigrated to the United States, to Berkeley, and he began to see other lessons and ways in which he could commemorate the horrible slaughter of Eastern Europe. And he writes a poem called "What I Learned from Jeannie Hirsch," to say what he had learned about how to commemorate these deaths, about how to make meaning out of slaughter. And it's a poem, it consists of 12 numbered propositions that he learned, but I'm going to read you 3. The first I want to read you says this, that they have been wrong who undermined our confidence in reason by enumerating the forces that want to usurp it: class struggle, libido, will to power. The second one reads like this. It says, the proper attitude toward being is respect. And the third one, which is the most puzzling, says that in our lives we should not succumb to despair, for the past is never closed down and receives the meaning we give it by our subsequent acts. The past receives the meaning that we give to it by our subsequent acts. So if I had to pick 3 propositions that should guide our ability to commemorate the horrible events of October 7th, these would be the 3 propositions. So let me explain why. So the first of those is that we shouldn't abandon reason. So why shouldn't we abandon reason? Well, for one thing, Milosz is very explicit. Reason is what prevents us from being subject to our desires, our libido, our will to power. It gives us distance from our own will, and our will is a very terrible thing. It can be a very terrible thing, and reason does that. But I think the more important reason that Milosz stresses reason is that reason is about the relationship between people. If I reason typically with someone, and that means I trust them to reason back, and that means I have a relationship with them that is other than zero-sum, other than war, other than destruction, other than anger. It's one of mutuality. If we reason together, then I have to respect your reason, and you have to respect my reason. So if we are in a world of reason, we are in a world of respect and recognition. I teach at a university because I believe in reason, because I believe in extending recognition and regret to everyone that I meet. And that's quite inconsistent with Carthage must be destroyed. If you want to destroy Carthage, you don't want to reason with Carthage, you want it to disappear. You want your will to triumph over Carthage, but if you commit to reason, you do not commit to Carthage must be destroyed. It's a very different attitude than that of Rome. The second proposition is that we have to use our reason to have good values, and the essential value, says Milosz, the most important value is that we have to respect being. So what does it mean to respect being? On one level, it means to respect the facticity of the world. It means that the world is as it is regardless of what we want, regardless of our fantasies of power. It means we have to have humility before the facts of the world. And one of the most important functions of reason is to allow us not to become prisoners of our own fantasies. We fantasize we can destroy Putin, fantasizes he can destroy Ukraine, or we fantasize we can destroy Iran. These are fantasies. These are what we want. But the facts of the world are really quite different than that. And we have to respect the facts of the world if we're going to actually live a life worth living. It's the antidote to our incessant will to power. So that's on one simple level, but on a deeper level, it's important to recognize that other people also exist. They are facts in the world. Every one of you is a fact in the world. To respect being is to respect each of you and the fact of your being in the world. And other people with whom you disagree, with whom you're angry, with whom you really think this person is terrible, they're nevertheless a fact. And if you close your eyes and wish them away, they won't disappear. In the end, you're going to have to live with all the people in the world with whom you disagree. You're going to have to respect their facticity. Other people don't disappear just because you don't want them. This is something we're going through in our democracy here. Half the people in this country can't bear the other half of the people in this country. And yet if we're going to have a country, you have to live together. Same in a region. If you're living together in a region, you shut your eyes, the other people aren't going to disappear. They're going to stay there. They're facts that you have to respect the facticity of their being. And that means you have to deal with them. And how do you deal with them? The way in which we deal with people with whom we disagree is called politics. Politics is what people do when they disagree with each other, but have to live with each other. And politics is about not agreement, but disagreement. It's about what Hannah Arendt called plurality. She says, politics is not about man, but men. Different people with different ideas who disagree with each other, but have learned the art through reason and other ways of living together. That's a necessity. That's what it means to respect being and the being of others. And the third and last proposition that I cited to you from Milosz has to do with the lack of despair. You should not despair in the present. I need this one because the present to me is full of causes for despair, but he gives a very interesting recipe for a set of advice for how not to despair. He says, you don't despair because you change time. You change the past to live in a different present. You change the future to live in a different present. You manipulate time not to despair in the present. That's a very odd thing to say, but it's exactly right for Jews because we are time lords. We manipulate time all the time. So consider the Passover Seder. Passover Seder, we begin with our ancestors, our forefathers were slaves in Egypt. But the whole function of the Seder is to get you to change that past so that you were a slave in Egypt. We were slaves in Egypt. That's the end of the Seder. We've changed the past so we become different in the present. We've changed ourselves. And by the end of the Seder, we've changed the future because the next year is in Jerusalem. Because we were slaves. We changed the past, we changed the present, we changed the future, we changed the present. By envisioning a different future, we make a different present. And that's what Milosz is saying. We have to keep to hope. We have to have a vision of what the future could be. And that changes who we are now. That changes the structure of the problem that we have to deal with now, etc. And that says that respecting being is not a recipe for passivity. It does not demand that injustices be endured. In fact, it's quite the opposite. To respect being is to make time in such a way that you can make justice. Milosz has a wonderful poem called Faith, and it ends with these lines. It says, look, see the long shadow cast by the tree, and flowers and people throw shadows on the earth. What has no shadow has no strength to live. So our strength to live is a fact of our own being. It must be respected like all facts have to be respected. We have to cast our shadow on the earth. We have to make the earth that we want to make, and we make it by hoping and envisioning a certain kind of future. And when we make a future, we have to respect the shadows of others because we have to live with them. There's just no getting around that. We can't wish it away. And that means that when we make a future, we have to make it so that it's a future in which we actually live together. We live together in peace in some ways. We can hope for that, but we live together. And because we're in a lifeboat, and we're either going to sink all together or we're going to flourish all together, and it's very hard to imagine what's in between. And that's what Milosz is cautioning us to do when he says, imagine a different past so that you can have a present in which you can cast your shadow on the earth. And I want to close by suggesting to you that this requires a certain kind of equilibrium in all of us, a very fragile, a very delicate, a very unstable equilibrium between, on the one hand, our own ideals, and on the other hand, respect for the alterity of others. It's a really hard balance to keep, a really hard equilibrium to find. But if we can find that equilibrium, if we can maintain that equilibrium, that would be worth commemorating the slaughter of October 7th. If we can resist the urge to destroy Carthage, if we can find a way to exercise reason, to respect being, to commit ourselves to a future in which all will flourish, this terrible past that we've all suffered will redeem itself, will have a meaning. And when the souls of those who were slaughtered come to us and say, what have you done for us? We can look them in the eye and say, this is the future that we create in your name.